Good morning. You're listening to Insurance Matchmaking, your path to health, life, and Medicare coverage with Matt Libby Insurance. And now, sharing his knowledge, here's your host, Matt Libby.
Well, good morning and welcome back to Insurance Matchmaking. This is going to be our fourth episode, so we're getting going here. And I do have a guest this morning. I have Beth Ruck with Conquering Clutter. Say hi, Beth.
Hello. Nice to be here today, Matt.
All right. Conquering Clutter. What's that got to do with insurance? One of the things, if you've been listening to my program, you've heard me talk about my Business Networking International, BNI, and Beth is one of my fellow members. And believe it or not, we've already talked about some things that are really related. The other thing is you've heard that Medicare is kind of my niche. That's my sweet spot. So I'm definitely working with folks that are early retirement, maybe not ready for Medicare yet, but bridging that gap with the older people. I say older people like me who are already on Medicare. But a lot of times there's things I think Beth can help them. But the other thing is we kind of work in the same, I think primarily the same age group. And again, but we can work with all ages. But those empty nesters or those recently widowed have things that pile up on them and they're not sure what to do. So we kind of work with kind of the same people. Would you agree that's kind of a good comparison there, Beth?
Definitely, Matt. Yep. I work with a lot of older people and especially widows, and they just don't know what to do with paperwork or other things, husband's accumulation of stuff, and now it's time to get rid of it. Right.
And one of the things I've mentioned to you, I think earlier, it comes up and it's in my mind all the time. And we always do this in our BNI of, well, how do I get that referral for you? What's a good way for me to lead in? And for me, it can be kind of awkward because sometimes I'm in people's homes and I can see they could really use your help. And it's kind of awkward of, okay, how do I suggest to them they might want to call you, or maybe some phrases that, and put the ball in their court so they get a hold of you without me sounding like, boy, your place is really a mess. You desperately need Beth. How can I ease into that conversation?
Maybe you could focus on, do they have their paperwork organized? Especially if you happen to see some piles of paper out, and just say it's super important to have your paperwork organized because if something happens to you, does your spouse know where to find the important papers? Do your children know where to find the important papers? Because if they do, and you become ill or sadly you may die, if it's organized, it's so much easier for their family to process things. Let's say they have a life insurance policy with you. What kind of papers should they have if they want to file the claim? So if they don't know that they have a life insurance policy with you, it's kind of a problem.
Right. Yeah. And then that comes up. You had mentioned you did a presentation a couple of weeks ago and actually kind of opened my eyes on some of the stuff thinking, and it's stuff that I deal with. But you talked about what should be and what shouldn't be in that safe deposit box. Can you expand a little on that?
Sure. So I wouldn't put in my safety deposit box a passport, a will, final instructions, the power of attorney papers. Like, I would not put the only copies in there because the bank isn't always open. Mm-hmm. If it's a holiday, a weekend, evenings, and let's say you got a call, your daughter's in a different country, something happens to her, you have a passport, but you can't get to it because it's in the bank safety deposit box. That's kind of a problem if you need to fly to wherever your daughter is. Or if your parents suddenly die and they forgot to put your name on the safety deposit box, and until they get like the death certificate and some other things to prove that they can get into the safety deposit box, they can't get in there. So that can be a real problem. We just want to help people to feel at peace by having their papers organized.
All right. Great answer there. Like I said, because I typically think, okay, the passport is probably the first one I'm thinking of. Hey, that should be in the safe deposit box. The other thing you run into is some, a parent usually in this case, and it's also a spouse passes away. And when they talk to the funeral home, they want their money right away. And so sometimes you can kind of assure them, here's a copy of the life insurance policy. As soon as we get the death certificate, we'll get that filed. And so then they may be saying, okay, we can get things prepared. The other thing is those advanced directives. So that is something to come up with. And I know I've had classes and stuff where they say, oh, here's paperwork for you to give your clients, so they can fill this out, so what their wishes are. So is that something that kind of falls into your realm also, or is it just kind of something you kind of do generally?
Well, if I don't know the answer, I will find a professional that knows the answer. So I try to guide people, and I might say, let's say I'm organizing their bank statement and I notice that only their name's on the bank statement and they're a widow. I might say, have you talked to your bank? Do you have one of your children that could be on the bank account with you, because that will speed up being able to pay bills. So I ask questions like that, but I, preface it by saying I'm not a banker, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a lawyer, but I know somebody that you can talk to, or here's a list of questions. If you want me to, we'll make the phone call together.
Right. So I wanted to also talk about, you're in an organization, was it Faithful Consultants or
Faithful Organizers?
Faithful Organizers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So it's a group of Christian, mostly ladies, but a few men that are professional organizers, and we meet monthly for a devotion, and we're there to support each other. So we remind each other to pray for our clients with them if they want it. But, before we go into a session with them, we would, pray and ask that we have a good session with them. And we may, mention it to the client like, hey, I'm part of this group. And if you feel that you would like us to pray before we start, I'd be happy to do that with you, because going through your things is very emotional and it can be very difficult for people. So I like to be very sensitive to them and to where they're at and to help them. Obviously, I'm not a counselor, but I want to be able to, listen and be helpful to them.
And I was just thinking on that because, in the insurance business, we work, we want to build rapport. We need some icebreakers to kind of relax it, because there's going to be tension. And obviously, like you said, it can be very emotional when it comes to, because one of the things I know, it's got to be tough in your job, but it's when you start doing that sorting, do you really need to keep this thing?
Right.
Do you really need 50 bread twist ties in your junk drawer? That might not be so emotional. Sometimes things they'll hold a certain sentimental value, but how important is that one to you? Or which thing, it's a memento, but it really wasn't that big a deal. I know I've noticed, as I was leaving here, sitting next to my chair right now, I have a program. I went to a Eagle Scout ceremony about a week ago to present an award. And so I've saved the program, but it's like, and I have other programs like that are just kind of laying around. It was nice to kind of keep up with that, but then it's like, then again, I don't really need that, down the road, so I'll probably need to get rid of it. And one of the things you had mentioned to me before we got together on this, and we were going back and forth about, hey, what should we talk about? And you'd mentioned something about, how long to save certain insurance papers and things like that. Now, did you have your idea on that, or was that kind of more of a question you wanted me to answer?
Well, I know, let's say if I had changed who I had my health insurance with, I probably don't need to keep the bills that came, as long as I've paid them.
Right.
And, I'd want to keep the explanation of benefits for a while to make sure that my bills and that match up together. But I know when I work with older people, they get the statements, and a lot of them still get in print. They don't get digital. So they have the monthly statements. They get like Medicare covered this much, and then their prescription thing covered this much.
Right.
And there's about 8 pages with 2 pages of actual information you really need. And then there's the page that's in like 20 different languages, which obviously they don't need, but they just don't know how much of that they need to keep. So I usually tell them, keep a year or 2, but after that, if it makes you feel more comfortable, shred them if it's got your Medicare number on it. Thankfully, they don't use your Social Security number anymore. So that's kind of what I guide them at. But I'm just wondering if you happen to have any more insight into that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that Medicare number. I was listening to a podcast this weekend, working in the garden or something, and somebody was talking about, and it was an older one that talked about when Medicare made that switch, that your Medicare number was no longer your Social Security number. And there was a lot of scams going on, that people calling and saying they were Medicare. and saying, we need to make sure you got your new card, and, what's the number you have on your card now, and things like that. And they were, just scamming people. The whole reason for going to that system was to protect them from the scams, and the scammers figured out how to use that as a way to scam. I don't think it's happening as much now since everybody's getting those numbers. And the other thing is, there's not a reason generally to give your Medicare number over the phone. And I always have to say that, but if I'm doing your Medicare enrollment over the phone, I'm going to need that Medicare number. But somebody just calling, saying they need to verify that it's you or something like that, no, don't give your number, especially if they called you and you didn't call them.
Right.
You mentioned the EOBs, and one of the things I thought of on that is, especially if you've had a major surgery or cancer treatments or something like that, I would say you want to keep those things for at least 5 years. Because what I run into a lot of times, I'll talk to somebody and they're trying to get a life insurance policy, or they're wanting to see if they can qualify the health underwriting for a Medicare supplement, where they're trying to change plans to get a cheaper rate or something like that. A lot of the times, one of the questions, in the last 5 years, have you, had this treatment? Have you had, and so it helps to have that to go back and go, oh, this was when the doctor said, this is the day I rang the bell and I was done with treatment. I could say in some ways, some of those things, 5 years, if they're just routine, hey, you went and had your annual checkup, everything was fine. As you said, you're not going to need it a couple of years. If you know that bill's been paid, everything's paid up, you're in the next year, you may not need to keep that. But those things, those major happenings, helps you keep a record of that. And you talked about organizing, the important thing. I'll run into a lot of times when somebody, what plan do you have now? And they open up their wallet and they'll have 5 ID cards.
Oh.
For medical plans. And a lot of times they're all the same, but because they've had the same plan for 3 or 4 years, and they've just hung on to each card. You don't need to. When you get the new card, you can get rid of the old card. Or it may be, does make sense. Maybe, again, you might want to hang on to the first one you got. That's when you know, so that way you know when you started.
Right.
But when you get a new card each year, you don't need last year's card. And it also makes sense to hang on to a year or two. If you change companies, it'll go, okay, this is when I had this one. The other thing, like you said, with the EOBs is you want to make sure the bills are paid. One of the things, I'll talk to people that sometimes they'll get bills, medical bills, and it's just that provider. And provider's a collective term. We're generally talking about whoever's providing your care. Could have been an ambulance, might have been a MRI, something like that. And sometimes, especially, I feel like the ambulance companies are a little more notorious for it, is they'll send out a bill immediately. Even though they know it's going to insurance, they'll send the bill. And some people, and they'll go, oh, I got a bill. It says it's due in 30 days, and don't pay the bill.
Right. Yep.
You have insurance. Your insurance is probably going to cover it, or wait until you get that EOB. And then when you get the EOB, explanation of benefits, it's going to say your provider billed this, we allowed this is the amount you should pay. And if the bill says that, yeah, go ahead and pay the bill. But if the bill is much higher, you need to be appealing the bill or just waiting in 30 days, and they'll probably send out another bill of the correct amount once they've been paid. But they want to get paid, and sometimes insurance companies can be a little slow in getting that bill paid, and so they're waiting on that.
Right.
So what's some of your methods of getting paperwork in order?
I am learning this new filing or finding system that I'm just starting to learn, and it was developed by the Productive Environment Institute. Mm-hmm. And one of them is when you get paperwork in, you divide it into 3 piles. So it's file, act, or toss. So if you don't really need to keep it, you will toss the piece of paper or shred it. And if you need to act on it, you put it in a different folder so that you know that, I've got to make a phone call, I've got to pay a bill, I've got to do something with this. And then the file part is I need to keep this, and I'm going to set up this filing system that will, if I need to go back and find it, I know where it is. So that's kind of my first thing. So you don't let a whole pile of papers accumulate and then go, oh, I have all these papers I have to go through and I don't know what to do with them all. If you do the file, act, toss, it keeps you at least current.
What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
All right. So I have a website called conqueringclutter.net. I'm also on Facebook under Conquering Clutter, and my name is Beth Ruck. And the phone number, if you want to call and leave me a message, is 937 888-564-1279. So you can reach me any of those ways. And if you're interested in setting up an appointment with me, do it through my website, and then I will contact you and we'll set up a complimentary discovery phone call.
All right. Well, we're going to head into our commercial break, and then we'll be back, and we'll talk some more about Conquering Clutter with Beth Ruck.
A power outage can not only be an inconvenience, but it can be dangerous. Cove Generators is your premier Generac home standby generator dealer, and they offer service and repair on all brands of residential and industrial generators. Be prepared for the next power outage. Call Cove Generators to inspect and perform maintenance on your Generac automatic standby generator or any brand of generator that you own. Visit covegenerators.com and never lose power again. Or give them a call at 931-559-3311. covegenerators.com.
This is Emily Gibson, your local Twin Lakes security consultant. Summer is here, and so are those summer vacations. Let us keep your home protected while you're away with remote video monitoring, alarm notifications, power outage alerts, and much more. Rest a little easier when you're away with a security system from Twin Lakes Security. Give me a call today to learn more at 931-528-2005 or visit us online at twinlakes.net.
Twin Lakes Security, TN-CERT C-0026.
Hey everybody, this is Jeff Root, General Manager at Ford Laguna Cookeville. Are you looking to roll this summer in a new ride? Then the only stop is at Ford Laguna Cookeville, where we have new inventory arriving daily. We also have a fantastic selection of pre-owned vehicles available. Let us help you find that perfect car, truck, or SUV for your next adventure. Lifetime warranty, car washes for life, and our 5-star service before, during, and after the sale. That's what you get at Ford Laguna Cookeville. At Ford Laguna Cookeville, our entire staff is dedicated to serving our customers, our community, and America the best we can. Come let us put you in a new ride from Ford Laguna Cookeville and experience why we believe excellence matters. Don't forget, the second Saturday of every month, we host Cars and Coffee at 7 a.m. Come see us, 1600 Interstate Drive, or visit us online anytime at FordLagunaCookeville.com.
And now, back to Insurance Matchmaking, your path to health, life, and Medicare coverage with Matt Libby Insurance, hosted by Matt Libby.
Welcome back to Insurance Matchmaking, and I'm your host, Matt Libby. I'm here with Beth Ruck today with Conquering Clutter. Also, just kind of want to remind you, easy way to find me. You can go to insurancematchmaking.com, and that will list my phone number. 931-881-3969 is the number, but usually people can kind of remember a website, where to go, and kind of Google it rather than find a number. But you obviously, you've got my name. You could Google that. I have an office right here in town on North Willow. I'm in the Larry Brown Electronics building next to the Bravo Cafe. And, of course, if you're listening to any of these Zimmer broadcast stations, you probably hear commercials for them. So if you've been around a while, you've probably eaten there once or twice. So they're in between the Domino's and us. We're right there on the west side of Willow. Right even with the hospital, actually. I tell people, I'm right across the street from the hospital, but it's a couple blocks in between, but there's nothing between us and the hospital but open lots or parking lots. So Beth and I were talking a little bit about what to do when that family member has passed on, what to look for, and generally, if you can get a hold of the policy or even just a copy of the policy, there should be an 800 number. That's probably the quickest way to get something. Again, and actually, I haven't run into this. I don't know if you call the 800 number on a weekend, if you're going to get somebody, but they're going to need the death certificates. That's one of the first things you're going to need, and it takes a bit to get that. And I have some people, though, unfortunately, I find out one of my clients has passed away when I find out their policy got canceled. And they don't notify. The insurance companies generally don't notify me, but if I'm looking at my list of clients and it's like, well, why is this one not active anymore? And then it's like, the funeral home notifies Social Security like immediately when they have someone pass on and that's coming through their services. So Social Security then goes ahead and lets Medicare know that you're no longer with us, and they notify the insurance company that policy gets canceled. Like I said, I'm not in that loop. So it's like, unless I happen to see it or someone contacts me. The good news is you don't have to worry about that policy. But the life insurance policy is usually where somebody's going to get a hold of me and say, what do I do now? And usually the first step is, if you have the policy, find the policy, do that. If they don't know, or if they, hey, it is one of those things I say when I meet with people a lot of times when when I want to talk about life insurance and say, okay, and I can't sell a life insurance policy during a Medicare enrollment appointment. But I can still bring up life insurance and say, hey, this is something I would like to talk to you. I can't do it today, but if we get back together, I'd like to talk life insurance. And one of the things I'll preface it with is I'm not trying to pressure you. But the other thing is I don't want to get a call from one of your children saying, hey, when mom and dad sat down with you and got Medicare, I know what the next question is. And they're going to be asking about life insurance. And I always try to make sure that if you don't have life insurance, it isn't because I didn't ask you about life insurance. It's you decided not to do it, or you told me you were well covered there. I won't push, but I definitely want to let them know. And I know that kind of went down a rabbit hole for what we were talking about, Beth. You had a question there. Do you have also suggestions there?
Well, I know I've helped a few people go through their important papers, and one thing that I've come across when I was with one client was that the company got sold and changed names.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a little detective work to figure out who was actually holding the policy. Did we have the right phone number to call? The premium was deducted monthly from her checking account, so I had that to start with, but I had to do some phone calling on behalf of my client to figure it out, so that I made a list up and gave it to her, but I also gave it to her daughter, who was going to be the executor of her will, and say, your mom has this policy, this is the policy number, this is the phone number you need to call, this is how much it's being charged a month, so that one, they would know that your mom died, so you could claim the insurance, and two, that they would stop billing you every month for it.
Right.
So that's another thing that you have to be on the lookout for. At least this person kept both things so you could kind of figure it out and you knew what was going on. And there was even a policy she had that I called and it had already been paid out or it was canceled.
Right.
So that was good to know too, because then her family didn't have to worry about that. So.
Right. And another thing a lot of times people worry about, because generally, when you pay a bill, if you've already paid it, you're probably not going to get refunded. Insurance comes out a little more forgiving when it is a death, and they find out that they passed away on the 3rd and the bill processed on the 10th. Obviously, they're going to refund that bill. It's not based on when you call to cancel, because a lot of times, a lot of plans, like accident plans, they're not going to cancel before the day that you contact them, or you've already paid. You were billed. We can cancel it as of the paid to date.
Sure.
So they'll do that. But generally, when someone passes away, they're going to go ahead and refund that last premium, because obviously they're not insuring that person anymore.
Right. So. Yep. But it's just, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have your important papers organized. And I recommend too, when I said, we talked earlier about not putting a lot of stuff in a safety deposit box, is I tell clients to buy the fireproof boxes that lock.
Right.
To store some of those things in. But then also to make sure that their kids or somebody knows where the keys are so they can get into them.
Right.
That could be a problem. Yep.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought about that. Some of them have like combination numbers, which can be great, but again, somebody needs to know that number.
Yep.
But I'm not sure if you can make copies of those keys. Some keys, it's like you just can't seem to get copies of. But I'm thinking of, like, hey, you've got one, it's on your key ring, or, you and your spouse have one, but you've got 2 or 3 kids that you're not sure which one of them is going to be, we're all pretty close to our kids. That's one of the reasons we're living in Cookeville now. When we moved from Oak Ridge, we just got closer to all our kids, and they're all in Tennessee, so it's not that big a deal. But you moved down here, was it Minnesota?
Northern Michigan.
Northern Michigan. I couldn't remember which it was. One of the 2 M's, and they were both there right up there.
I have lived in Minnesota. That's where I grew up.
Okay. But. And then your daughter was living here, I think.
No, she moved with us.
Oh, she moved with you. Okay.
Yep. But every 6 months for sure, I go through and remind my husband and my daughter where things are. I'll be like, if something happens to me, here's the keys, here's the boxes, this is where it is. I also use password protection called LastPass, but there's a lot of them out there, so I don't have to remember all the passwords. That's another thing that's important to make sure that people know what your passwords are so they can.
Right.
Because with so many things being digital these days and no paper being sent to you, you need to know these passwords, and it's can be very frustrating if you don't know what they are.
Well, and you mentioned like the LastPass, so that gives you that option, where you get into those things online, and that can be very handy because a lot of times you may not live in the same state with any of your, children. I say adult, I'm talking about adult children here.
Right.
You might live in Arizona and one's in Colorado and one's in Connecticut.
Yes.
And they can be really spread out. So, which one of those is going to take care of things for you? Those times can really come up.
I just know sometimes for people, it's easy to get rid of if somebody dies or they have to move. It's easy to get rid of the kitchen supplies.
Uh-huh.
And that's not a big deal, but it's not. It's very hard and time consuming to go through important paperwork.
Right.
So that's almost more important to get organized than the kitchens in some respects.
Now, do you run into sometimes when you're meeting with folks that are, they've got those things that aren't something that's going to be donated, but it's like my daughter is going to get this and my son is going to get this. And do you recommend in that time that, hey, you probably should talk to an estate attorney, or talk to an attorney and and put that in a will?
Right.
Or I guess the other thing is on that, I wouldn't necessarily be the power of a will, but do some of your clients just do a statement, and have it printed out with their important papers? That
Yes. It's kind of called like last wishes. So it's not related to your health, but it's kind of like, or called instructions. So you'd be like, this money and property is going to be evenly divided between the kids. And it's important to identify like things that are worth a lot of money perhaps in your house, so that one kid doesn't, they're like, well, you got something that's worth $5,000 and I want something that's worth $2,000. How are you going to work that out?
Right.
And there's some great books that you can have that can help you with these nitty gritty little details. But I always ask my clients if they have a will, because as soon as you have a kid, you need a will. Because you need to say who the guardian's going to be, and you don't want the courts to decide that for you. So, but it's just better to have a will. So I guide people to go talking to, like you said, an estate attorney, and then making sure if they want to give something to somebody, that's totally up to them. And I might even encourage them to do it before, they can still make that decision. They don't haven't gotten Alzheimer's or they haven't died. So they can write a story. And they can share the memory with their kid and be like, this is why I want you to have it. This is where I got it, why it was important to me. And I know that you really like, for instance, my mom had a Lenox vase that she thought was going to be worth a lot of money. It really isn't. She got it for a wedding present. It's very pretty. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to take it. And occasionally I'm going to put flowers in it, because then I'll remember my mom and where it came from. But I've gone around and done that with certain things, writing little note card about why something was important to me. So my kids will know, like, why did she keep this?
Right. Now, obviously, you have a business. It's not a volunteer service. How do you typically charge? Is it so much per hour, or do you kind of go and do an estimate of the job and say, okay, I can help you get this organized. This is what it's going to cost for my services.
Right. So right now I charge an hourly rate. If I'm doing it in person, it's a 2-hour minimum because you don't get a lot done in an hour. But I can also work virtually with someone if they have the technology to, be in a Zoom call with me and send me photos. And then that hourly rate also, but only for an hour at a time. And then they get some homework and we do some follow-up. And sometimes I work with people just once because they have something to do, or other times I've worked with people for a couple years because they have a whole house of stuff they need to go through.
Well, thanks, Beth, and thanks for joining me this week. It's Insurance Matchmaking with Matt Libby Insurance. And as I've asked before, I want suggestions. What's some questions you'd like to have answered on the show? That helps me know what's important to the folks that are listening. So please submit those. And also guest suggestions. You may know somebody that kind of fits in my realm and be a good prospect to be a guest on there, maybe even you'd like to be a guest. As I mentioned, I'm in veterans organizations, and so anything that helps veterans, I'm interested in interviewing people or people who work with seniors in, could be a nonprofit or something like that, but, we work with a lot of the same people. So if you know somebody that we could help that way, please let me know who you'd like to have on the show again. InsuranceMatchmaking.com. Again, I'm your host, Matt Libby, and had a great time here. Also, if you're in business, if you have a business, I've mentioned our Business Networking International. We meet every week for lunch with 35 business people to pass referrals to each other. If that's something that might help your business, get with me on that also. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again next week.
You've been listening to Insurance Matchmaking with Matt Libby, your path to health, life, and Medicare coverage with Matt Libby Insurance.